Flight attendant Syed Blackman looked lost. He was actually the airline's lead safety engineer. They say the skies can bring out the best and the worst in people. During one fateful flight aboard American Airlines, a simple misunderstanding spiraled into an astonishing chain of events that no one could have anticipated. A flight attendant, quick to judge and slow to listen, singled out a quiet black passenger who appeared lost. But little did she know, he was actually the airline's lead safety engineer on a critical mission. In the tense hours that followed, secrets unraveled, alliances shifted, and destinies collided, revealing a lesson in humility and truth that would leave everyone's lives changed forever. Ronald Patterson stood in the bustling corridor of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, shifting his carry-on from one hand to the other. At 6'2", with dark brown skin and an athletic build, he cut an imposing figure. Yet inside, he felt an unusual mix of excitement and tension. Ronald, an accomplished lead safety engineer at American Airlines, had a special project awaiting him in Seattle, a new, cutting-edge Boeing 737 safety system that he and his team were finalizing. For the past several weeks, he had worked tirelessly, logging late nights to ensure every detail was perfect. Now, the time had come to see it through. His phone buzzed, and he glanced at a text from his supervisor, Miranda Jenkins, who had become a trusted mentor. "Good luck today," she wrote. "Your presence is crucial. They're counting on your input." Ronald nodded, appreciating her encouragement. This was no ordinary trip. The airline had pinned high hopes on a system that could revolutionize in-flight safety protocols. The press was eagerly waiting for any sign of progress. Corporate leadership was expectant, and the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, was also keeping a close watch. Ronald knew his role in this ambitious plan carried weight. He believed wholeheartedly in the significance of the upgrade. The gate area hummed with life. Families juggled strollers, kids clutched stuffed animals, and business travelers tapped away on laptops. The overhead announcements punctuated the hum of voices. Ronald found himself scanning the boarding signs, double-checking that he was at the right gate. He noticed that Gate 12 was strangely empty, and he glimpsed a different flight listed on the digital display. Confused, he pulled out his e-ticket and realized there had been a last-minute gate change to C-14 just across the hall. Before he could move, he felt an abrupt tap on his shoulder. Turning, he came face to face with a flight attendant who wore a polite but somewhat forced smile. Her name tag read Cheryl. She was petite, with carefully styled blonde hair, an immaculate uniform, and a pin that boasted her 20 years of service. "You look lost," she said, in a tone that sounded more condescending than helpful. "Can I help you find something?" Ronald blinked in surprise, not entirely sure what triggered her approach. There were dozens of other passengers around, many also checking their phones or scanning the monitors. "I'm headed to Seattle," he replied softly. "I just noticed the gate change. So I'm actually fine, just about to head over." Cheryl nodded slowly, her eyes narrowing slightly as she took in his appearance. "All right, sir," she said, her words clipped. "We want to make sure all our passengers know where they're going." He managed a polite smile, though he couldn't help the slight twinge of discomfort. Something in her tone felt off, like a subtle implication he didn't belong, or maybe he was reading too much into it. Shaking off the strange encounter, Ronald gathered his things and proceeded toward Gate 14. Little did he know, this brief exchange was just a speck on the radar of what would become a turbulent journey. The moment Ronald reached Gate 14, he knew something was amiss. A line had formed, and the seating area was jam-packed, but the conversation among passengers was hushed. People seemed on edge. An elderly man complained that the flight had been delayed due to staff issues, while a nearby mother struggled to calm her toddler, who was crying incessantly for reasons nobody could discern. Amid this atmosphere, Ronald took a seat in the corner, He answered a few urgent emails about the safety system presentations scheduled for later that day. The project demanded his attention, even in the boarding area. He was typing quickly, summarizing last-minute changes, when an announcement crackled over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is a final call for Flight 2987 to Seattle. We will begin a pre-boarding for passengers needing extra time, and then we'll proceed with regular boarding. Thank you for your patience." He rose and moved to the line for business class travelers. His position as lead safety engineer came with certain privileges, but Ronald never flaunted them. Still, the company had provided him a business class ticket for comfort, especially considering he would be heading straight into meetings upon arrival. As the line began moving, he caught sight of Cheryl at the podium. Their eyes met, and she hesitated for just a second. Ronald couldn't pinpoint the emotion flickering across her face. Was it curiosity, suspicion, or mere coincidence? When he reached the front, Cheryl's smile was unconvincing. "Your boarding pass, sir," she said. Her colleague, a younger flight attendant named Mariana, stood beside her. Mariana didn't seem to notice the tension, greeting each passenger with a genuine warmth that contrasted with Cheryl's rigid demeanor. Ronald handed over his pass. With a quick scan, Cheryl motioned for him to proceed. He offered a courteous nod and stepped onto the jet bridge. Inside the aircraft, he found seat 3A, one of the more comfortable seats near the front. Settling in, he placed his laptop bag beneath the seat and fastened his seatbelt. Slowly, the other business class passengers filtered in. A middle-aged executive wearing a crisp navy suit took seat 3B, giving Ronald a cordial nod. Across the aisle, a young couple holding hands seemed excited, perhaps heading off for a romantic getaway. Each new arrival brought renewed energy, and though the cabin was subdued, there was an undercurrent of anticipation. But just before the boarding door closed, Ronald felt a slight disturbance. He glanced back to see Cheryl entering the cabin, her posture stiff. She locked eyes with Ronald again this time, with a more pointed gaze. Another flight attendant, Ebony, discreetly whispered something to Cheryl, presumably about the pre-flight checks. Yet Cheryl's eyes lingered on Ronald for a moment too long, creating an inexplicable tension. He forced a small smile again, determined not to read too deeply into it. Soon, the cockpit door opened momentarily, allowing a glimpse of the pilots preparing for departure. The captain's authoritative voice echoed through the cabin speakers. "Good morning, folks. Welcome aboard American Airlines Flight 2987 to Seattle. Expect a little turbulence en route due to weather patterns over the Rockies, but it should be manageable. Flight time is around 3 hours and 50 minutes. Flight attendants, please prepare for departure." Yet, as the safety briefing commenced, Ronald couldn't shake the feeling that the real turbulence was about to begin. In the back of his mind, he was prepared for anything after all. Unexpected challenges were his domain as a safety engineer, but he had no idea that the challenges would be so personal this time. 10 minutes after takeoff, the aircraft leveled off at cruising altitude. The seatbelt sign chimed off, and a soft murmur replaced the initial hum of ascent. Passengers began to settle in, some opening laptops, others flipping through in flight magazines or drifting off to sleep. Ronald reclined slightly, pulling out a thick folder of documents detailing the new Boeing 737 safety enhancements. He felt relieved to have a moment of peace to review notes for his afternoon presentation in Seattle. Outside his window, the morning sun radiated across the engine's sleek metal casing. Everything seemed calm. Suddenly, the curtain separating business from economy snapped open, and Cheryl stepped through with a forced smile. She started greeting passengers in the front cabin, asking for drink orders. Her entire demeanor felt rehearsed. She set a plastic tray on the corner of Ronald's seat divider. "Anything to drink, sir? Coffee, tea, water, juice?" "Coffee would be great. Thank you," Ronald said politely, expecting her to move on. Instead, Cheryl hovered. She scrutinized the folder in his lap, which had official American Airlines branding on the cover. "Interesting reading material," she commented, arching an eyebrow. "You must be really dedicated. Are you some kind of contractor?" Ronald was taken aback by her tone. It walked a fine line between curiosity and suspicion. Still, he decided to respond courteously. "I'm actually the lead safety engineer for this project," he explained. "I'm heading to Seattle for a critical meeting." Her eyes widened slightly before narrowing again. "Oh, that's a big responsibility. Seems unusual. We haven't seen you around the crew areas before." "Most of my work is on the ground," Ronald said, trying to keep his voice steady. He wondered why her interrogation felt so pointed. Cheryl nodded curtly. "I see. I suppose you're important then." Before Ronald could respond, she turned on her heels and headed to the next row, greeting the young couple. Oddly, she was all smiles for them, as if her earlier tension had evaporated. Ronald exhaled, perplexed by her shifting demeanor. He decided to let it go. Maybe she was just having a stressful day. Moments later, Cheryl returned with Ronald's coffee. She placed it down without a word, then abruptly reached over and shut his laptop, which was partially open from earlier. "We're in flight," she said tersely. "We prefer large electronic devices remain properly stowed unless actively being used. Safety protocols." Ronald blinked. He was about to mention that the seatbelt sign was off and that laptops were allowed at cruising altitude, but she had already moved on. The passenger in seat 3B gave Ronald a look of shared confusion. A tension brewed within Ronald. It wasn't about the coffee or the laptop. Something more insidious seemed to be unfolding. He resolved that if this continued, he might need to speak with someone else in the crew or even file a complaint upon landing. Yet, as a black man in a corporate world, he knew he had to measure his responses carefully. Overreacting could cost him far more than a scene at 30,000 feet. He sipped his coffee, eyes drifting to the folder in his lap. In a few hours, he'd be in Seattle, presenting the future of airline safety, a future he'd helped design. He tried to focus on the importance of that mission, reminding himself that in the grand scheme, the petty actions of one flight attendant shouldn't matter. But in a world where the smallest biases could ripple out into larger conflicts, Ronald suspected this was only the beginning. As the flight progressed, the captain's forecast of turbulence became a reality. Small jolts rocked the plane, causing the overhead lights to flicker occasionally. Passengers gripped armrests, and the flight attendants began their safety checks, ensuring tray tables were up and seatbelts were fastened. Ronald calmly continued his review, pausing only when the turbulence grew a bit heavier. Mid-flight, as beverages and snacks were served, Cheryl's interactions with other passengers seemed normal, even pleasant. She laughed with the couple in row 2, offered extra pretzels to the executive in 3B, and chatted amiably with a family in row 4. Yet every time she passed by Ronald, her demeanor chilled. He tried to dismiss it as unintentional, but an uneasy sensation gnawed at him. Her polite facade cracked whenever she glanced in his direction. Eventually, Ebony, the other flight attendant, served Ronald a second cup of coffee. She was friendly, making small talk about the new features American Airlines was rolling out. She recognized the official folder and struck up a conversation about how the company was always innovating. Ronald felt a refreshing sense of normalcy talking to her. Ebony even apologized for the earlier confusion about the laptop policy. "There's no harm in using your laptop at cruising altitude, especially after the seatbelt sign is off," she clarified. "I'm not sure what that was about." Ronald simply smiled and thanked her, not wanting to stir up trouble among the flight crew. Ebony nodded empathetically, seemingly aware that something was amiss, but also unwilling to create a scene in front of the passengers. "If you need anything, let me know," she said gently. For a while, the aircraft settled into a calmer rhythm. With the seatbelt sign-off, Ronald returned to his notes, double-checking the presentation slides. He felt the tension in his shoulders ease. Maybe Cheryl's odd behavior would end as quickly as it started. Then the crackle of the intercom broke his concentration. "Flight attendants, please be seated," the pilot announced. "We're expecting moderate to severe turbulence ahead." Within seconds, the plane began to quake more violently, jolting passengers against their seats. Ronald, accustomed to analyzing structural integrity and flight data, knew the Boeing 737-737's design could withstand far worse. Still, the fear in the cabin was palpable. A few overhead bins popped open, scattering luggage onto the aisle. A child screamed in the back. The flight attendants, strapped into their jump seats, appeared calm but alert. In the midst of the bumps, Cheryl's voice suddenly echoed over the cabin microphone. "Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We will resume service once conditions improve. Thank you for your cooperation." Ronald clenched his fists on the armrests, resisting the urge to help when he saw a bag slide dangerously close to a passenger's legs. He wasn't permitted to leave his seat to secure loose items now. The turbulence escalated for a solid 10 minutes, culminating in a sharp drop that elicited gasps and screams. Outside, thunderheads loomed, flickering with flashes of lightning. Eventually, the plane steadied. A collective sigh of relief passed through the cabin. Cheryl and Ebony unbuckled from their jump seats to check for injuries. It was in that moment of relief that Cheryl, scanning the rows, locked eyes with Ronald yet again. He couldn't discern the emotion behind her gaze, fear, annoyance, or something else entirely. For a fleeting moment, Ronald allowed himself to wonder, did his presence pose some sort of perceived threat to her? Or was she grappling with her own issues, seeing in Ronald a scapegoat for her frustrations? Whatever it was, he sensed that the turbulence of their dynamic was far from over, even if the plane's path had momentarily smoothed. With the turbulence behind them, the passengers settled into a subdued relief. Some resumed watching movies on the seat back screens, others attempted to nap, and a few rummaged through their carry-ons to check for damages or spilled beverages. Ronald, taking a moment to stretch his neck, felt the anxious hum of the cabin slowly begin to dissipate. The flight attendants soon returned to their routine tasks, offering water refills and checking on passengers who appeared shaken. Ebony passed Ronald's seat with a kind word, asking if he was all right. He nodded in gratitude, appreciating her concern. Meanwhile, Cheryl was further down the aisle, kneeling to assist an elderly woman retrieve her rolling bag from beneath the seat. Moments later, the flight attendant call button dinged near Ronald. A teenage girl in row 4 signaled for assistance, claiming she needed a motion sickness bag. Cheryl rose from her position and made her way forward. As she passed Ronald, she shot him another guarded glance, as if expecting him to be somehow out of place or causing trouble. Ronald tried to brush it off, but the nagging thought wouldn't leave him. Why did she keep singling him out? Before the flight, Ronald had read about numerous incidents where black travelers felt profiled or disrespected. He had to weigh the possibility that he was imagining this. After all, no confrontation had occurred, just a series of uncomfortable moments. Yet, intuition told him something was indeed off. He decided to focus on his presentation slides again, making final tweaks on his laptop. The new Boeing safety system was designed to detect and respond to microfractures and cabin pressure changes in real time. Ronald believed in it wholeheartedly. He'd poured his life into developing the technology. If the FAA approved the system, it could become the gold standard for commercial aviation safety. Just then, a cough made him glance up. The business-suited man in 3B leaned over. "You're an engineer for American Airlines?" he asked softly. "I couldn't help noticing your documents earlier." "That's correct," Ronald replied, offering a friendly nod. Working on some new safety measures for the 737. We're testing it in Seattle. The man smiled. My name's James Carroll. I'm in corporate communications at Boeing, believe it or not. Small world, huh? Ronald's eyes lit up. No kidding. Great to meet you. I'm Ronald Patterson. They shared a short laugh about the coincidence. James leaned closer. I actually heard some chatter about an upcoming system update. If it's anything like what I've been told, it's going to revolutionize mid-flight risk detection. Ronald felt a swell of pride. That's the hope. We're still finalizing the details, but the synergy between the airline and Boeing is crucial. Their conversation was cut short when Cheryl stepped into their row with a forced cheeriness. Everything all right here, gentlemen? She paused, looking at Ronald with a hint of skepticism. James, oblivious to the tension, beamed at her. All good. We were just talking about Boeing's upcoming safety enhancements. Cheryl's eyes flicked to Ronald's folder again. Indeed, she said tightly. Just let me know if you need anything else. She walked away and James frowned slightly. She seems unsettled. Ronald lowered his voice. I think I might be making her uncomfortable, though I can't quite figure out why. James shrugged. Try not to take it personally. Some people just have off days. An off day, maybe that was all it was. Yet the seeds of suspicion had firmly taken root in Ronald's mind. The real trouble, he feared, was still waiting to unfold, and with each passing minute, it inched closer. The seatbelt sign flicked on again as the captain announced, Folks, there's another patch of rough air ahead, so please return to your seats and buckle up. A collective sigh rustled through the cabin. It was shaping up to be a particularly bumpy flight. Ronald, fastening his belt, braced for another round of shudders. Sure enough, the plane began to vibrate. Overhead compartments rattled, and the roar of the engine seemed to intensify. Ronald felt his heart rate quicken, while turbulence rarely bothered him, knowing all too well that the aircraft was engineered to endure such conditions. There was something about this flight that kept him on edge. Cheryl, visible through a gap in the curtain to the galley, appeared to be in a heated discussion with a male flight attendant from economy class. Their faces were tense, and though Ronald couldn't hear their words, he caught the tail end of Cheryl pointing toward the front cabin, toward him perhaps. The male attendant glanced in Ronald's direction, shook his head dismissively, and turned away. Cheryl stomped her foot in frustration, then composed herself and returned to her duties. The strange interaction added more fuel to Ronald's concerns. Was she complaining about him? Did she think he was trespassing in business class? Or did she doubt his credentials somehow? His mind churned with possibilities. Soon after, the turbulence subsided and the seatbelt sign clicked off. Passengers exhaled with relief once more. Determined to break the awkward tension, Ronald pressed the overhead call button. He needed a bottle of water, and he figured Ebony might respond. However, Cheryl materialized in his row, her features rigid. Yes? She asked tersely, clearly bracing for some kind of confrontation. May I please get a bottle of water? Ronald requested, forcing a polite smile. He hoped to diffuse whatever negativity lingered between them. Her lips pursed. Certainly, she said after a beat, then disappeared behind the curtain. She returned quickly, handing over the water. Before he could thank her, she spoke in a low tone. You know, if there's anything you need, you can ask directly during regular service hours. Ronald's polite expression faltered. I'm sorry if I inconvenienced you. The seatbelt sign just turned off, and I needed some water. She frowned, as if disbelieving him, then shrugged. All right. Enjoy your flight. Ronald watched her retreat again. The older gentleman in row 2, who had been discreetly observing, cleared his throat. Sorry to overhear, he said gently, leaning back to glance at Ronald. Is everything okay? Ronald forced a smile. I'm sure it's fine, he replied, not wanting to make a scene or pull other passengers into the drama. Inside, though, A vortex of questions spun. Something about her behavior was far too personal to be chalked up to a bad day or typical stress. He decided not to speak to Cheryl anymore, unless absolutely necessary. However, Ebony must have sensed the tension because she soon approached. "Is everything all right, sir? I noticed you seem a bit uneasy." Ronald offered a polite nod. "Just a bit of tension with your colleague. I don't want to cause trouble, but I feel singled out." Ebony's face fell, empathy evident in her eyes. "I'm sorry. I'll keep an eye on things. Please let me know if there's anything I can do." With that, she headed back toward the galley. Ronald returned his attention to his laptop and tried to refocus on his presentation. The numbers, charts, and protocols stared back at him. Usually, he found comfort in logical precision facts and figures that grounded him in certainty. But here, in this enclosed space hurtling through the sky, the intangible complexities of human bias felt more threatening than any mechanical hiccup. He took a long sip of water, breathing in and out slowly. Hours still remained before landing, and he had no choice but to endure the flight. Little did he know what lay ahead would escalate far beyond mere awkward glances and curt words. In the grand scheme of airline safety, personal prejudices might seem small, but on this flight they were about to loom large, setting the stage for a confrontation that would test not only Ronald's patience, but also the very boundaries of justice and respect. The flight continued in a tense stasis, with passengers drifting in and out of light conversation or periodic naps. Ronald tried to immerse himself in finalizing the slides. Occasionally, his thoughts wandered to his fiancée, Ava, who was also in aviation and operations manager for an airport in Denver. She'd often joked that Ronald's calm under pressure was what drew her to him. He quietly wished she was here now, whispering soothing words that would remind him to keep his cool. At around the halfway mark of the flight, the seatbelt sign came on yet again. The captain's voice resonated. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have some weather ahead of us, so please remain seated. Flight attendants, secure the cabin." The plane began rocking, though not as severely as before. Ronald fastened his belt, closed his laptop, and tucked the folder away. Cheryl and Ebony appeared in the aisle, making their final checks. Overhead compartments were locked, seats were upright, and tray tables folded. One row behind Ronald, a boisterous passenger loudly protested the constant seatbelt restrictions. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man wearing a sports cap. "I got to use the restroom, man," he complained to Cheryl, slurring slightly. It seemed he'd indulged in a few too many drinks before or during the flight. Cheryl responded firmly, "Sir, the seatbelt sign is on. For your own safety, please remain seated until the captain deems it safe to move about." "Come on," he drawled, trying to stand. The plane jolted again, forcing him to wobble and cling to the headrest of the seat in front of him. A handful of passengers glanced over, alarmed. "I'm sorry, but you need to sit," Cheryl repeated, her tone urgent. This time, her hand pressed against his shoulder, pushing him gently back into his seat. The man grumbled, cursing under his breath, but complied for the moment. Ronald watched the scene unfold. He found himself momentarily thankful that Cheryl had the composure to handle a challenging passenger. For all the tension she'd caused him personally, she was still a professional flight attendant who had to maintain safety and order, but the respite was short-lived. Another wave of turbulence hit, and the plane lurched. Drinks toppled, and a few passengers yelped. The cabin lights flickered ominously. Suddenly, the sports-capped man launched forward again, determined to reach the restroom at any cost. Cheryl lunged, trying to stop him, and the scuffle drew more attention. In the chaos, Ebony arrived to assist. Their combined efforts finally got the man back into his seat, but not before he let out a string of expletives. Ronald felt his pulse quicken. Unpredictable disruptions in a confined aircraft always carried the risk of escalation. The man shoved Cheryl's arm away, yelling, "Get off me!" He lifted a finger, pointing accusingly at Ronald for no apparent reason. "And you, what are you looking at?" Ronald blinked, stunned. He raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Sir, I'm not looking for trouble," he said, voice calm. Cheryl's eyes snapped to Ronald, then back to the unruly passenger. "Sir, calm down. He has nothing to do with this." She sounded genuinely concerned. The man, however, seemed to latch onto Ronald as a target. "I see you," he muttered, "sitting there like you own the place." Ebony was quick to intervene. "Sir, if you continue this behavior, we'll have to report you. Please remain seated." The tension in the cabin was thick enough to cut with a knife. A few rows ahead, James Ronald's new acquaintance stole a worried glance toward him. Ronald stayed silent, refusing to engage. The last thing he wanted was an altercation in midair. Cheryl managed to subdue the man's outburst, but as she guided him back firmly, her stern gaze flickered toward Ronald yet again. He couldn't read her expression this time. Was it fear, blame, or a sudden empathy, realizing that Ronald had been an easy scapegoat in this whole fiasco? Eventually, the man slumped in his seat, muttering incoherently. Cheryl and Ebony retreated to the galley, presumably to file an incident report. Ronald exhaled, trying to calm the adrenaline surging through his veins. Another wave of turbulence set the overhead lights swaying. The air felt thick, charged with tension, as if bracing for the next blow. As he stared at the back of the seat in front of him, Ronald found himself thinking, this wasn't just about one ignorant passenger or a stressed flight attendant. It was a microcosm of how easily biases, assumptions, and heated emotions could erupt, especially in high-pressure environments. If something else happened, something bigger, would cooler heads prevail, or would prejudice take the controls? After the incident with the disruptive passenger, Cheryl retreated to the forward galley for a while. Ebony tended to the rest of the cabin, offering calming words and checking on passengers rattled by the turbulence and confrontation. Ronald attempted to bury himself in his notes again, but he found his mind drifting, recounting every unsettling exchange with Cheryl since he boarded. He wished the flight would just land, so he could escape the claustrophobic tension and focus on the safety system presentation. At last, the seatbelt sign went off, and a hush of relief swept through the aircraft. Ronald felt his shoulders loosen. Then, to his surprise, he saw Cheryl emerge from the cockpit's direction, her face set with grim determination. She strode directly toward row 3, ignoring the calls of a passenger in row 2, who was trying to get her attention. "Mr. Patterson," she said, addressing Ronald by name for the first time. The use of his surname startled him. How did she learn it? He assumed it was from the manifest or from Ebony. "I need you to step to the galley with me, please. There's a matter we need to discuss." Ronald's pulse quickened. His eyes flicked to James, who looked equally perplexed. The couple across the aisle exchanged worried glances. "Is something wrong?" Ronald asked calmly. Cheryl's voice was low, devoid of the usual forced cheeriness. "It would be better if we speak privately." Her hand gestured to the forward galley. Unease coiled in Ronald's stomach, but he nodded, unbuckling his seatbelt. Rising, he followed Cheryl up the aisle. Ebony, spotting them, seemed alarmed but stepped aside. In the narrow galley, Cheryl turned to face him, arms folded. "I understand you're some kind of engineer, but I'm concerned about your presence on this flight," she began bluntly. Ronald fought to keep his composure. "Concerned? About what, specifically?" Cheryl glanced at the door leading to the cockpit, as if checking to see if the pilots were listening. "About your documents, your behavior. I spoke to one of my colleagues about unusual passenger activity." She took a breath. "I need to ask, are you here legitimately? Or is there another reason you're on this plane?" A surge of indignation shot through Ronald. "I beg your pardon. I'm on an official trip for American Airlines. I'm leading a safety systems project with Boeing. I don't understand how that could be questionable." Cheryl's eyes flickered with suspicion. I find it odd you've never been introduced to the crew, and you keep rummaging through confidential files. You could be risking passenger safety." Ronald's voice trembled with controlled anger. "If you bothered to look at my company ID or asked Ebony, you'd know exactly who I am. My credentials are in my carry-on, and those confidential files are the reason I'm flying to finalize an important safety presentation in Seattle." She crossed her arms, undeterred. "I don't mean to cause offense, but I have a responsibility to ensure everyone's safety. You look out of place. It's my gut feeling. Out of place because I'm black. Is that your gut feeling?" The words erupted before he could stop them, laced with a bitterness he couldn't contain. Cheryl stiffened, an offended look crossing her face. "I didn't say that." "You implied it," Ronald said, trying to steady his breathing. "I've been polite, cooperative, and even a target of that drunken passenger. Yet you suspect me of wrongdoing. Why?" She seemed to waver for a moment, as if second-guessing her approach. Then her gaze hardened. "I won't apologize for doing my job. Now, if there's no issue, please return to your seat. But don't think I won't keep an eye on you." Ronald drew in a shaky breath. "Fine," he said, forcing the word out before he turned and made his way back. Passengers watched with thinly veiled curiosity. Ebony caught his eye, her face clouded with concern. By the time he reached row 3, his mind was a whirlwind. He wanted to lodge a complaint right then and there, but worried it would cause more problems mid-flight. So he sat, heart pounding, as the hum of the engines filled his ears. Across the aisle, the couple stared at him sympathetically, as if they'd overheard enough to understand the situation. Cheryl's parting words echoed in his head. "I won't apologize for doing my job." He wondered just how far she was willing to take her so-called responsibility and whether anyone else would stand up for him if she decided to push her accusations further. For now, all he could do was endure, waiting for the moment the plane touched down in Seattle, where he hoped justice and common sense would finally prevail. The final hour of the flight felt like the longest 60 minutes of Ronald's life. His confrontation with Cheryl left him fuming and anxious. But he forced himself to focus on the tasks ahead, meeting Boeing's engineering team, presenting the near-final design for the safety system. He'd worked too long and too hard to let one flight attendant's bias derail his commitment. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Folks, we've begun our descent into Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. We should be on the ground in about 25 minutes. Local weather is partly cloudy, with a temperature of 68 degrees. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for arrival." A wave of relief washed over the passengers. People sat up, collected their belongings, and prepared for landing. Ronald closed his laptop one last time, storing it carefully in his bag. James Carroll leaned over from seat 3B. "I couldn't help but see you go up front. Everything okay?" Ronald hesitated, then offered a tight smile. "I'm fine, just a misunderstanding." He wasn't about to share the details mid-flight, but James nodded, his expression a mix of curiosity and concern. Through the window, Ronald spotted the Seattle skyline, peeking through the cloud cover. He felt a flicker of excitement. This was a city of innovation where countless aviation breakthroughs had taken place. The imminent approach of the runway steadied his nerves. Soon he would be out of Cheryl's domain, free to report his experience to American Airlines management if needed. As the plane touched down, the landing gear screeched against the tarmac. The aircraft taxied toward its gate, the engines humming with decreasing intensity. Passengers unbuckled seatbelts in unison, a rustling wave of relief. Ronald joined them, standing to retrieve his overhead bag. Suddenly, Ebony appeared. "Sir, could you please remain seated for a moment?" Her voice was gentle but urgent. Ronald's heart sank. "Is there an issue?" She lowered her voice. "Cheryl has contacted airport authorities to ask that you be questioned before you leave the aircraft. She's claimed there's a potential security concern. A cold shock spread through Ronald's limbs. A security concern? What on earth did she tell them? Ebony's eyes shone with sympathy. I don't know all the details. But the captain mentioned local security might board the plane. He's not convinced there's any merit to it, but he's following protocol because it's a crew-initiated alert. Passengers nearby overheard, and a murmur of confusion rippled through the cabin. James stood, eyebrows raised in alarm. "You've got to be kidding," he whispered to Ronald. "This is absurd." Ronald couldn't agree more. Was Cheryl really so paranoid or so prejudiced that she escalated a baseless accusation to security? He clenched his fists at his sides, struggling to remain composed. Legally, he had done nothing wrong. His biggest fear, however, was how quickly misunderstanding could spiral into an official interrogation. The door opened, and two uniformed airport police officers boarded. The first, a tall man with a stern expression, spoke to the captain near the cockpit. The second officer scanned the cabin, pausing when he locked eyes with Ronald. Ebony swallowed hard, stepping aside as they approached. "Mr. Ronald Patterson?" the first officer asked politely. Ronald nodded. That's me. We received a request to speak with you regarding a possible security concern. Would you come with us?" A hush fell over the plane. All eyes were on Ronald, as if he had suddenly become the center of a bizarre spectacle. Cheryl stood at the galley entrance, arms folded, her expression inscrutable. Ronald exhaled slowly, trying to keep his voice level. "Of course. I have nothing to hide." He gathered his carry-on, stepping into the aisle. James put a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "I'll explain who you are to the authorities. I have contacts at Boeing. This is insane." Ronald offered a grateful nod, but kept his gaze forward. Inside, he fought a storm of emotions, anger, fear, and a profound sense of betrayal by the very airline he served. Whatever happened next, it would set a precedent for how a top safety engineer who happened to be black could be treated by those who were supposed to protect and serve passengers. Ronald walked down the jet bridge flanked by two airport police officers. Onlookers, travelers waiting to board other flights paused to stare. The officers led him into a side corridor near the arrivals gate, where another officer waited by a small office with frosted glass windows. The humiliating feeling of being singled out weighed heavily on Ronald's chest. He knew he had done absolutely nothing wrong, yet here he was, about to be questioned like a criminal. James Carroll followed closely behind, determined to offer support. Ronald could hear him on the phone, presumably calling contacts at Boeing to vouch for Ronald's identity. Ebony also trailed behind, her anxious gaze darting around. Cheryl was conspicuously absent. She had left with the other passengers, perhaps to avoid facing the fallout of her accusations. "Step inside, Mr. Patterson," the senior officer said, opening the door to the small office. Ronald complied, placing his carry-on beside the chair they indicated. The room had all the warmth of a sterile interrogation chamber, a desk, fluorescent lighting, and stark white walls. One of the officers began, "We're sorry to inconvenience you, sir, but we received a report that you might pose a security risk. We need to ascertain the facts." Ronald's voice was steady but tinged with frustration. "I'm an American Airlines employee and the lead safety engineer on a project with Boeing. I have my company ID and all necessary documents." "I can show you right now," the officer nodded. "Please do." Ronald opened his carry-on, retrieving his identification and a folder containing an official letter outlining his role and itinerary for the Seattle meetings. The officer examined each piece carefully, nodding occasionally. Another officer stepped out to verify Ronald's credentials with the airline's ground staff. After a tense few minutes, the door opened and James peered inside. "Ronald, I just got off the phone with a Boeing exec. They're ready to confirm your credentials." and that you're here on official business." The officer motioned James inside. "Thank you for coming forward. We're in the process of validating Mr. Patterson's documents. However, we must complete our protocol." James sighed, adjusting his tie. "I understand, but there's been a grave misunderstanding. This man was singled out due to an overzealous crew member. Let's just confirm everything and clear this up." Ebony, who stood quietly by the door, chimed in. "Officers, I was on the flight. There was no issue with Mr. Patterson's conduct. In fact, he was the target of an unruly passenger at one point." Another pause followed as the second officer returned, handing the senior officer a slip of paper. The senior officer read it, brow furrowing. He then looked at Ronald, a hint of apology in his eyes. "It seems everything checks out, Mr. Patterson. Your story aligns with the airline's records. We have confirmation from both Boeing and American Airlines." The officer exhaled. "On behalf of airport security, I apologize for the inconvenience. We have to take any reported security threat seriously, but evidently there was no basis for this claim." Ronald felt a weight lift off his chest. He mustered as much composure as he could. "I understand you were doing your job, but I need to know how to file a formal complaint. This flight attendant's actions were baseless, and I believe racially motivated." James nodded firmly. "I'll support that complaint. This has gone too far." The officer produced a business card. "You can contact American Airlines Customer Relations, and there's also a channel for FAA complaints if you feel you were discriminated against in flight. We'll document this incident from our end. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry you had to go through this." Ronald took the card, lips pressed together. His shoulders felt stiff, a residue of the tension that had built up over the last few hours. Ebony walked over and gently placed a hand on his arm. "I'll back you up, Mr. Patterson, with whatever statement is needed." He looked at her, grateful. "Thank you, Ebony. I appreciate it." James glanced at his watch. "Ronald, we should get you to your meeting. You're already running late." Stepping out of the small office, Ronald nodded, his resolve solidifying. He might have been delayed and humiliated, but he wasn't about to let this overshadow the hard work he'd put into his safety engineering. He owed it to his team and to himself to continue with his mission. Still, an ember of anger glowed within him, and he knew it wouldn't be extinguished until justice was served for the blatant profiling he'd endured. James insisted on driving Ronald to his meeting at Boeing's Seattle facility. Ebony, relieved that Ronald was cleared, parted ways to handle her post-flight duties, promising to stay in touch for any official statements he might need. As Ronald slid into James's rental car, he glanced at his phone, several missed calls from Miranda Jenkins, his supervisor, and a flurry of texts from colleagues wondering where he was. "I can't believe she actually called in a security threat," James muttered, navigating the busy roads near SeaTac Airport. "That's the kind of thing that can ruin careers if not handled properly." Ronald rubbed his temples, his head throbbing from the ordeal. "I've faced bias before, but never like this. The entire flight was tainted by her suspicions. She even confronted me in the galley." James shook his head in disgust. "Ridiculous. Let me know if you need legal counsel. Boeing's got resources, and so does American Airlines. They won't stand for this." Ronald stared out the window at the Seattle skyline. "I appreciate that. For now, I need to get through my presentation, but after that, I'm absolutely filing a complaint." The car weaved through traffic, eventually pulling up to the sprawling Boeing campus. James guided Ronald to the designated visitors' lot. They hurried inside, where a flustered junior engineer recognized Ronald and ushered him into the conference room. There, about a dozen people waited around a large table littered with coffee cups and scattered notes. Miranda Jenkins stood at the front, clearly anxious. Her eyes lit up with relief when she saw Ronald enter. "Thank goodness you're here," she whispered, pulling him aside. "I was worried. Your flight should have landed over an hour ago. Ronald nodded. Long story, but I'm here now. Let's get started. Despite the stress that weighed on him, Ronald delivered a polished presentation. He walked the Boeing team through the new system's architecture, detailing how it would detect microfractures, measure cabin pressure fluctuations in real time, and communicate seamlessly with ground control. His voice was steady, his points clear, and even the last-minute data he'd compiled on the plane came in handy. Toward the end, Miranda offered her own insights, praising Ronald's work and underscoring the importance of their collaboration. Applause followed. Executives congratulated Ronald, praising the thoroughness and innovation of his approach. Several men and women approached him with handshakes and requests for deeper follow-up sessions. As the crowd filtered out, Miranda stayed behind with Ronald and James. She arched an eyebrow at Ronald. "Okay, now you have to tell me what really happened." Quietly, Ronald recounted the flight, the suspicious stares, Cheryl's interrogation, the airport police detainment. Miranda's expression darkened with each sentence. "That is absolutely unacceptable," she fumed. "I will be contacting HR and corporate security. They need to launch a formal investigation. American Airlines can't allow this to go unaddressed." James nodded vigorously. "I was there when airport police took him aside. I called Boeing's executive to vouch for him. This can't be swept under the rug." Ronald exhaled slowly, feeling both validated and drained. It was a relief to be among allies, but he realized this was just the beginning of a lengthy battle for accountability. "I'll file a complaint as soon as I can. For now, I just want to wrap up things here." Miranda laid a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We've got your back. No one should have to endure that kind of discrimination." For the first time all day, Ronald felt a slight release of the tightness in his chest. He had accomplished his immediate mission. The presentation was a success. Yet in the back of his mind, the confrontation with Cheryl still burned, casting a long shadow over what should have been a triumphant milestone in his career. Resolving that injustice would be a new mission, one he refused to abandon. In the days following his successful presentation at Boeing, Ronald became the talk of the aviation circles for two reasons: his breakthrough safety system proposal and the shocking incident of discrimination he'd faced. Word spread quickly within American Airlines corridors that a high-level engineer had been profiled and almost detained due to a flight attendant's unfounded suspicions. True to her word, Miranda Jenkins filed a comprehensive complaint with both American Airlines management and the appropriate regulatory bodies. Ebony, who had witnessed the entire ordeal, provided a statement detailing Cheryl's behavior. James Carroll offered corroboration from his vantage point. Even the airport police's incident report referenced the flight attendant's groundless accusations. Corporate leadership at American Airlines took swift action. They called Ronald in for a meeting at their Fort Worth headquarters, where executives apologized profusely. They acknowledged not only the distress he endured, but also the potential legal ramifications. In a public-facing statement, the airline reaffirmed its commitment to diversity, inclusion, and fair treatment for all employees and passengers. A week later, Ronald received a call from Human Resources. The woman on the other end spoke in a measured tone. "Mr. Patterson, I'm informing you that after our internal investigation, flight attendant Cheryl's actions were found to be in direct violation of our Code of Conduct and anti-discrimination policies. As a result, she has been terminated from her position. We will also be implementing additional sensitivity training for all crew members to ensure this doesn't happen again." Ronald felt an odd mixture of relief and sadness. While he believed Cheryl's punishment was warranted, he couldn't help but feel that the situation might have been prevented through better training or more rigorous oversight. Still, her immediate termination was an unmistakable message. Prejudice would not be tolerated, especially at an airline that served millions of passengers annually. In the aftermath, Ronald's professional star continued to rise. The Boeing safety system progressed through the final stages of testing and was poised for FAA review. Industry publications praised the collaborative effort, and Ronald was singled out as one of the bright minds steering aviation toward a safer future. He found himself invited to speak at conferences, where he diplomatically recounted the importance of vigilance in both technology and human relations. As for Cheryl, rumors circulated about how she had moved out of state to avoid the media spotlight. Some accounts claimed she was shocked by her dismissal, never fully comprehending that her biased treatment of a black passenger, who also happened to be an esteemed colleague, was an egregious breach of policy and basic respect. In quiet corners of the internet, debates raged about racial profiling in public spaces, using Ronald's story as a cautionary tale. But Ronald didn't dwell on Cheryl. He had a wedding to plan with Ava, a future to build, and an entire industry relying on the innovations he was spearheading. In the grand scheme, one person's prejudice was small compared to the groundbreaking safety improvements set to protect millions of travelers. The karmic justice he received reminded him that sometimes the best course was to remain steadfast and let the truth surface in its own time. Still, whenever Ronald passed through an airport gate or settled into a seat on an American Airlines flight, he couldn't help but recall the humiliating experience of being singled out without cause. That memory fueled his determination to create an aviation world that was safe, not just physically, but socially for everyone. And in the quiet moments at cruising altitude, with the clouds rolling beneath the wings, he reminded himself that no amount of turbulence on the plane or in life could ever force him off course. In a world where small biases can spark storms bigger than any turbulence in the sky, Ronald's story shines as a powerful reminder. Judging someone at a glance can lead to life-altering consequences for you and for them. Amid the chaos, Ronald remained composed, trusting that truth and justice would eventually prevail. In the end, not only did he earn vindication, but the ripple effect of his stand sparked meaningful change within the airline. If you found Ronald's journey inspiring, remember this: we all have the power to rise above prejudice, to challenge outdated mindsets, and to demand fairness in every space we occupy. Don't let anyone clip your wings or ground your dreams. Keep striving, keep shining, and if this story resonated with you, please do your part to share it. Like, share, and subscribe to help spread this message far and wide. Let's keep soaring toward a brighter, more inclusive future.